Μια από τις πιο ισχυρές προσωπικότητες, κυρίες και κύριοι, του δυτικού κόσμου, η προσωπικότητα εκείνη που εκφράζει κατά τον πλέον δυνατό και εύγλωτο τρόπο το σημερινό γίγνεσθε όσον αφορά τους διεθνείς συσχετισμούς. Ο Μάνφρεντ Βέρνερ, γενικός γραμματέας του ΝΑΤΟ, ήταν σε αποκλειστικές δηλώσεις στο προφίλ. Δηλώσεις που μας έκανε στην Κοπενχάγη της Δανίας, όπου βρέθηκε για να παραστεί στην 38η συνέλευση της Ατλαντικής Ενώσεως.
Ο Γερμανός Υπουργός Εξωτερικών Κλάους Κίνγκελ δηλώνει ότι ασκούνται πιέσεις για τη διευθέτηση του θέματος των Σκοπίων. Ο Πρωθυπουργός μεταβαίνει στη Βόνια ακριβώς για να αποσαφηνίσει τις προθέσεις της Γερμανίας.
Ο Υπουργός Εξωτερικών της Δημοκρατίας των Σκοπίων, Ντένκο Μαλεύσκι, έρχεται το πρωί στη Βόνια για συνομιλίες με τον Γερμανό ομολογό του Κλάους Κίνγκελ. Αρχικά τον κύριο Κίνγκελ επρόκειτο να συναντήσει και ο πρόεδρος της Δημοκρατίας των Σκοπίων, κύριο Γκλιγκόροφ. Τελικά ο Γκλιγκόροφ δεν θα έρθει για τεχνικούς λόγους στην έδρα της γερμανικής κυβέρνησης. Ο κ. Κίνγκελ είπε σήμερα ότι η δήλωση της Λισαβόνας για τη Μακεδονία καταρχήν ισχύει. Διευκρίνησε όμως ότι στην πολιτική δεν υπάρχουν αποφάσεις που να ισχύουν αιώνια. Υπάρχει πίεση, εξήγησε ο κ. Κίνγκελ χωρίς να διευκρινίσει από ποιον, για μια λύση στο θέμα της Μακεδονίας, καθώς η κατάσταση είναι πολύ άσχημη. Παράλληλα, ο εκπρόσωπος του Γερμανικού Υπουργείου των Εξωτερικών, Hans Schumacher, διευκρινίζοντας χθεσινή δήλωσή του στο ΑΠΕ, εξήγησε σήμερα στο Εθνικό Πρακτορείο ότι όσο ισχύει η απόφαση της Λισαβόνας, η Γερμανία δεν θα πάρει πρωτοβουλία για να την ανατρέψει. Ο εκπρόσωπος του Γερμανικού Υπουργείου των Εξωτερικών δεν είπε πάντως τι στάση θα κρατήσει η γερμανική κυβέρνηση αν πάρουν άλλες χώρες της κοινότητας την πρωτοβουλία.
Από κυβερνητική
πλευρά να αποδεχθεί τετελεσμένα.
Ο κ. Παπανδρέου χαρακτήρισε την νίκη του Μπιλ Κλίντον
μεγάλη νίκη των προοδευτικών δυνάμεων. Όχι μόνο στην Αμερική, αλλά και για την Ευρώπη.
Και πρόσθεσε ότι υπάρχουν δυνατότητες να υλοποιήσει τις δηλώσεις του για τα εθνικά μας θέματα, αφού είναι πολύ ισχυρό πρόσωπο. Λίγο αργότερα, απαντώντας σε παρέμβαση του βουλευτή Αντώνη Κοτσακά, ο κ. Παπανδρέου είπε ότι κατά τη γνώμη του πρόκειται για επιστροφή στην πολιτική Ρούσβελτ και ότι οι δηλώσεις Κλίντον είναι πολύ προοδευτικότερες αρκετών Ευρωπαίων σοσιαλδημοκρατών. Από τις ομιλίες των βουλευτών, ο κ. Σταύρος Μπένος ζήτησε την επιστροφή των τριών διαγραμμένων βουλευτών στην κοινοβουλευτική ομάδα, ενώ ο κ. Σπύρος Γιαννόπουλος είπε ότι η λειτουργία της μπορεί να γίνει αποδοτικότερη.
Να πάμε για λίγο στις ΗΠΑ. Επιφανείς στελέχη της ελληνικής ομογένειας που υποστήριξαν προεκλογικά τον Μπιλ Κλίντον θα συμμετάσχουν στην κυβέρνηση του νέου Αμερικανού Πρόεδρου. Ο Κλίντον διαβεβαίωσε και χτες ότι η εξωτερική πολιτική της Ουάσιγκτον θα παραμείνει σταθερή.
Με πυρετώδεις ρυθμούς, ο Μπιλ Κλίντον μαζί με τον μέλλοντα αντιπρόεδρο Αλ Γκορ προετοιμάζουν τη νέα κυβέρνηση των Δημοκρατικών και βασικά μέλη της είναι πιθανό να ανακοινωθούν μέσα στην επόμενη εβδομάδα. Μεταξύ τους και σημαίνοντας στελέχη της ελληνικής ομογένειας. Ο Τζο Στεφανόπουλος, που θεωρείται βέβαιο ότι θα πάρει σημαντική θέση στο Λευκό Οίκο, ο Μάικλ Δουκάκης, που είναι πιθανό να αναλάβει το Υπουργείο Οικισμού, και ο Τζον Βραδίμα στο Υπουργείο Παιδείας. Μιλώντας για τους άμεσους στόχους της διακυβέρνησής του, ο νέος πρόεδρος των ΗΠΑ υποσχέθηκε να επικεντρωθεί σαν ακτίνα λέιζερ, όπως είπε, στην οικονομία, ενώ ταυτοχρόνως καθησύχασε την διεθνή κοινότητα για την εξωτερική πολιτική που θα ακολουθήσει.
I urge America's friends and foes alike to recognize, as I do, that America has only one president at a time, that America's foreign policy remains solely in his hands, that even as America's administrations change, America's fundamental interests do not.
Λίγο πριν αναχωρήσει για την εξοχική του κατοικία στο Camp David, ο ηττημένος των εκλογών, ο George Bush, επέστρεψε στο Λευκό Οίκο, όπου τον υποδέχτηκαν με μεγάλη θέρμη οι οπαδοί του.
Let's finish this job with style. I am very grateful to all of you. It's been a wonderful 4 years and nobody can take that away from any of us.
Σχέδιο νόμου για την οικονομία κατέθεσαν στην κοινοβουλευτική ομάδα.
Η αντιμετώπιση των προβλημάτων της αμερικανικής οικονομίας. Στο μεταξύ, ο ηττημένος των εκλογών George Bush,
συνεργάτη του Bill Clinton, σε εγκάρδια και φιλική ατμόσφαιρα συζητήθηκαν τα εθνικά θέματα, τα Σκόπια, το Κυπριακό, για τα οποία προεκλογικός ο Clinton είχε διατυπώσει την σταθερή υποστήριξή του σε ελληνικές θέσεις. Ο κ. Στεφανόπουλος και εξέχοντες παράγοντες της ελληνικής ομογένειας συζήτησαν επίσης με την Υπουργό Πολιτισμού, τον Υπουργό Επικρατείας τον κ. Ανδρενόπουλο και την Υφυπουργό κ. Μπακογιάννη. Το ΝΑΤΟ αποφάσισε να συνδράμει,
οι οποίοι τους πολιόρκησαν στην είσοδο του Λευκού Οίκου.
15 ημέρες μετά τις εκλογές της 3ης Νοεμβρίου συναντώνται αυτή την ώρα στο Λευκό Οίκο ο Αμερικανός πρόεδρος George Bush και ο άνθρωπος που θα αναλάβει τα ενία της χώρας στις 20 Ιανουαρίου, ο Bill Clinton. Ο νεοεκλεγής πρόεδρος έφτασε στη Ουάσιγκτον με τη σύζυγό του Χίλαρη στις 8 παρα 10 ώρα Ελλάδος. Όπως δήλωσε νωρίτερα ο Bill Clinton, θα ζητήσει την αμερόληπτη γνώμη του πρόεδρου Bush για θέματα εξωτερικής πολιτικής που εκκρεμούν και τα οποία θα πρέπει να αντιμετωπίσει αμέσως μόλις αναλάβει τα καθήκοντά του. Το ζεύγος Κλίντον έφτασε στο Λευκό Οίκο στις 8 και 10 ώρα Ελλάδος, όπου έγινε δεκτό από τον Αμερικανό πρόεδρο Μπούς. Οι δύο πρώην αντίπαλοι έσφιξαν τα χέρια παρουσία εκατοντάδων δημοσιογράφων. Μετά τη συνάντηση με τον πρόεδρο Μπούς, σε μια συμβολική χειρονομία, ο Μπιλ Κλίντον θα επισκεφθεί μια γειτονιά της Ουάσιγκτον όπου κατοικείται κυρίως από μαύρους. Στη συνέχεια θα παραστεί σε δεξίωση αμερικανικής οργάνωσης για την προστασία των παιδιών.
Για δεύτερη συνεχή ημέρα συνεχίζεται στην Ιταλία η μεγάλη...
You know, you have to deal with these things, and again, you understand that that's part of the scrutiny and so forth. I mean, look, compared to what's happened to Clinton and all this foolishness he's had to put up with, you know, my situation was easy.
Yes, I was Bill Clinton's lover for 12 years. And for the past 2 years, I have lied to the press about our relationship to protect him.
Did the governor at any time tell you on the telephone to just tell the truth about what happened?
He told me to just deny it.
Governor Clinton used a condom? Jesus.
Right here. Right here.
Are you prepared tonight to say that you've never had an extramarital affair?
I'm not prepared tonight to say that any married couple should ever discuss that with anyone but themselves.
Μία ιστορία κρεβατοκάμαρας, έστω και πολύ παλιά, είναι ο εφιάλτης των υποψηφίων αλλά και των υπευθύνων κάθε προεκλογικής εκστρατείας. Ο Λάρι Σάμπατο είναι καθηγητής στη Βιρτζίνια και συγγραφέας ενός best-seller στο οποίο καταγράφονται όλα τα μικρά βρώμικα κόλπα της αμερικανικής πολιτικής.
The better-known candidates will all hire private detectives and sick them on one another, so that in the end, you have these massive reports produced on every major candidate running that goes all the way back to elementary school and reveals all of the terrible things they did in throwing spitballs at the teachers and you know, this kind of thing. It's outrageous, but now that's a part of American politics. You don't see much of it in the campaign, in part because each side knows that the other side is doing it. And it's like the old missile race between the US and the Soviet Union. They achieve détente because they both know they can blow each other up.
You're talking about the famous story of Palladino, private investigators?
Yes, during the, you're talking about 1992?
Is
yes.
that true?
Yes, that's been confirmed, where you'll have a campaign, in this case the Clinton campaign, hiring private detectives to look into the stories of the president's or presidential candidates' liaisons with women to see which are true and which aren't, but also to find out incriminating information about some of the women so that they can hold that over the heads of the women to keep them from going public, to prevent what Clinton's campaign coordinator called bimbo eruptions.
I remember when we were getting ready for the first debate in New Hampshire in the fall of 1991. I was doing an interview just like we're doing now, and when I finished the interview, Bill Clinton came in, who was Governor Clinton at the time, to talk about the debate which was going to take place the next day. And I was sitting next to him. Of course, the camera was on him for the 6 o'clock news, and you know, they asked him a few questions, and then the final question that was asked was, Governor, have you ever had an extramarital affair? And he looked at him and he said, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you. And of course, that caused the whole, its history after that, you know.
Placing spies in the other campaign, using girlfriends of the candidate, old girlfriends who may have a grudge against the candidate to find out personal information, or to use current girlfriends of the campaign manager.
Did anyone ever approach you from the Republican Party, perhaps another Democratic candidate, to urge you to tell this story publicly?
Yes, they did.
Who?
I can't say.
Wait, no, are you saying that somebody from another campaign, Democratic Party or Republican Party, approached you to tell the story? Was it the Democratic Party or was it the Republican Party, Ms. Flowers?
It was the Republican Party.
Στις φετινές εκλογές, οι υποψήφοι είχαν φροντίσει να πάρουν τα μέτρα τους, αλλά η έκπληξη της γκόμενας δεν μπορούσε να λείψει. Το θύμα της αυτή τη φορά ήταν ο Ντίκ Μόρις, βασικός πολιτικός σύμβουλος του Κλίντον. Λίγες μέρες πριν το συνέδριο των Δημοκρατικών, το περιοδικό Time του είχε κάνει την εξαιρετική τιμή να τον βάλει στο εξώφυλλο. Σπάζοντας ένα μοναδικό ρεκόρ, ο Ντίκ Μόρις βρέθηκε στο εξώφυλλο του Time και την αμέσως επόμενη εβδομάδα. Ένα call girl είχε αποκαλύψει σε ένα φθηνό φύλλο ότι επισκέπτονταν τον Ντίκ Μόρις στο ξενοδοχείο του στην Ουάσιγκτον. Ο Μόρις αναγκάστηκε να παραιτηθεί και το γεγονός δεν ξέφυγε της προσοχής του Bob Dole.
Dick Morris is my friend, and he is a superb political strategist. I am and always will be grateful for the great contributions he has made to my campaigns and for the invaluable work he has done for me over the last 2 years.
Τις περισσότερες φορές τα σκάνδαλα ξεκινούν από φθηνά ταμπλόιτ και εφημερίδες οι οποίες μοιράζονται δωρεάν στα σούπερ μάρκετ. Αλλά στο παιχνίδι μπαίνουν αμέσως και τα σοβαρότερα μέσα ενημέρωσης. Ο Τζον Σίγκεντάλερ είναι πρόεδρος της οργάνωσης Freedom Forum, η οποία διοργανώνει συνέδρια και συζητήσεις με τη συμμετοχή διασήμων Αμερικανών δημοσιογράφων.
So the question of whether a candidate is gay, or whether a candidate cheats on his wife, or whether a candidate has had an abortion, all of those issues find their way into the media, sometimes as a result of charges by the political opponent, but quite often because the media digs them out.
Η ανακάλυψη ερωτικών σκανδάλων στο στρατόπεδο του αντιπάλου δεν είναι το μοναδικό μικρό βρώμικο κόλπο της αμερικανικής πολιτικής. Συχνά οι ανυπόστατες φήμες για την υγεία των διεκδικητών της Προεδρίας έχουν καταστροφικά αποτελέσματα στην πολιτική τους υγεία.
I mean, there was one week where I had to defend myself from charges that I had had a mental breakdown or something. I mean, it was absolute nonsense. My doctor had to get on national television and say, look, I've been treating this guy for 17 years, he's fine, he's healthy, this, that, and the other thing.
You slip $20 or $50 or $100 to a low-level medical technician to bring you someone's file, and they can simply photocopy it. That's happened all the time. And what you'll have is a campaign surreptitiously sending copies of the file anonymously through the mail to political reporters. And maybe it shows that a candidate has had venereal disease or something of that sort.
Reagan called me the invalid at one point, and then he came back and apologized. Well, it was all planned. I mean, there was nothing, he hadn't made a mistake. I mean, that was all part of their strategy. And, you know, it was ridiculous and it was foolishness, but for 1 week our campaign stopped while we had to deal with this. And the Bush people were pushing it and the press was gobbling it up, and we dropped about 10 points in the polls in a week over this foolish thing. And there was absolutely nothing to it.
There are also some other dirty tricks we are mentioning in the book. For instance, the bugging of the telephone.
They don't bug the telephone so much because you don't have to do that anymore. There are devices today that exist where you can actually spy on a meeting taking place across the street by aiming a device at a plate glass window and picking up the sound vibrations. It's really just the Central Intelligence Agency taken domestic for American politics.
The reason I was calling was to tell you that this last Wednesday someone got into my apartment. Okay.
So somebody broke in your apartment?
Well, yeah.
Maybe Larry was sorry that they don't have a course in the university about political dirty tricks, you know, so he can teach it. In 1972, for example, the Segretti dirty tricks, you know, in New Hampshire, where he had a group of people calling up voters and saying, hello, I'm calling from the Muskie campaign. Will you vote for Muskie? It was 3 o'clock in the morning. People didn't appreciate being called at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the next morning they got up and they said, you know what? Somebody from Muskie's headquarters called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, those dirty fools, I'm not voting for them.
Γιατί όμως τα βρώμικα κόλπα αποδίδουν? Γιατί δίδεται τόσο μεγάλη σημασία στην ιδιωτική ζωή των πολιτικών?
She was worried about being assumed to be guilty just because her name was brought in. I said, that's not true. Even if your name gets used in the absence of proof, nobody can prove you're guilty. Don't worry about it.
The question about the personal life of the candidate has been with us almost since the founding of this country. The press in the early days of this country, of course, grew out of a Puritan ethic. And that puritanical streak in this country has at times affected the press. I mean, we pose as a very moralistic society, very prudish at times. And so Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton had their peccadillos exposed by the press in the early days of this country. And then about the turn of the last century, Grover Cleveland was accused of having an illegitimate child. He was elected to the presidency. Right now, presently, in contemporary America, there is a very strong movement called the Christian right, the religious right wing. And they demand to know everything about the personal life of any public figure.
When Gary Hart was sort of invited the press to follow him, and they did, and then they found that he was having an interesting interlude on a boat with someone other than his wife, and a reporter in a press conference asked him if he was having an affair. And that sort of broke the ice, and after that, the press felt that they could ask anything about anyone's personal life.
Does this scrutiny prevent some competent people to run?
Oh, sure. I'm sure of it. I mean, there are just many, many very good people in this country who would not subject themselves to these kinds of things. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, who among us does not have something in his background? The best people will not run for public office anymore because they understand that their whole reputations can be destroyed with a single morning's headlines. They spent their whole life making their families and their communities proud of them, and all of this can be destroyed very, very easily. So why would a good person run? Instead, it's people with overweening ambition who wake up every morning just dying to get into high office, who have less to lose. These are the people who run for office.
My own perception of it is that that is not so. And I tell you why I say that. Last time, 7 candidates ran when Clinton ran and won for the Democratic nomination and then the presidency. He had 7 opponents in the Democratic primary elections. 7 qualified people. Some were governors, some were United States senators, some were businessmen, and he won that election. Now he's the incumbent. This time Bob Dole had 6 opponents, and some of them very, very strong. So I think while there is a perception that people don't want to run, the truth of the matter is that when the job comes open, there are plenty of candidates to run to fill it, and most of them are good, qualified, decent candidates who could serve if elected.
The General even considered legalizing drugs. And in front of our children on MTV, the president himself.
If you had it to do over again, would you inhale?
Sure, if I could. I tried before.
Bill Clinton. He just doesn't get it. But we do.
Η Αμερική είναι η χώρα της διαφήμισης και γι' αυτό διαφημίσεις υπάρχουν παντού, ακόμη και στις τουαλέτες. Οι αρνητικές διαφημίσεις είναι ένα σχετικά νέο όπλο καταστροφής και ένα από τα πρώτα θύματά του ήταν ο Μάικλ Δουκάκης.
Why did you follow this strategy of turn the other cheek to Bush?
Well, we had run a very positive primary campaign. And I had made it very clear to my people that I wanted no attacks on the other Democratic candidates, that I wanted this to be positive. If we couldn't win it in a positive way, then I didn't want to be president. And we had a very successful primary campaign. And my sense was that that's what the American people were looking for. They were tired of the division and the debates and the controversy over Reagan stuff and so forth. Now, what we learned very painfully is that if your opponent is going to come at you with these kinds of attacks, however distorted, you cannot let them go unanswered. And nobody will ever make that mistake again.
It's a fairly recent phenomenon. It probably started in 1980. I think that was the first year we had a lot of negative advertising. In 1988, we had the famous Willie Horton commercial against Governor Dukakis, which was very damaging. but I think people who manage campaigns always recommend negative advertising because it seems to work. It teaches people what is bad about a candidate rather than what is good.
One of the things that Clinton did in 1992, which he learned, unfortunately, from my experience in '88, was that you can't let the other guy attack you the way Bush attacked me and not respond, even if you don't like to do that kind of stuff.
The Clinton campaign in 1992 created what was essentially an instant response. They responded to every criticism, every charge, instantly, and in some cases, even before they were public.
This was the famous war room.
Right, that's right, and it worked. And they'll do it again, they've done it this time.
Δωμάτιο πολέμου ονομάστηκε το γραφείο όπου βρίσκονταν το επιτελείο του Clinton το 1992.
You all have Marla come up to the war room on the 13th floor. Thanks.
Αξιοποιώντας την εμπειρία Δουκάκη, οι σύμβουλοι του Clinton απαντούσαν αμέσως σε κάθε προσωπική επίθεση εναντίον του υποψηφίου των Δημοκρατικών. Η τακτική τους ήταν να γυρνάνε τα θέματα στην οικονομία.
He has not denied that he has engaged in marital infidelity. He denied a specific one.
He said that he had problems in his marriage.
That's right, and he has talked about the draft, and to some people it's a character problem.
Bill Clinton's passed his character test throughout his life and throughout this campaign, and he's shown it through his commitments to real fights. And what he's going to do in this campaign is focus on what's important to the American people, on the jobs and the education. That's what the American people care about.
Μέσα στο πολεμικό δωμάτιο, ένα σύνθημα στον τοίχο επαναλάμβανε την τακτική αυτή. The economy stupid, δηλαδή η οικονομία ανώτε. Ο Τζέιμις Κάρβιλ, ο επικεφαλής της προεκλογικής εκστρατείας, δεν δίσταζε να το θυμίζει και στον ίδιο τον Κλίντον, όταν το συμβούλευε στο τηλέφωνο.
Stay focused. Talk about things that matter to people. You know? It's the economy, stupid. Okay?
The campaign manager is extremely important. He's the person who makes the decisions. He's the guy who decides where the candidate is going to go, who he's going to speak to, how he's going to behave.
Why can't we attack George Bush? Why can't we talk about the lowest economic growth in the last 50 years? Why can't we talk about that being a political hack as drugs are in this country? Why can't we talk about the fact that he has done nothing about education, the environment, the deficit's out of control, that he said no new taxes? Yeah, I mean, you know, you can just go, why is it that I'm always asked, what are we going to do when George Bush attacks us? Why don't you go ask George Bush what's he going to do and we hold him accountable for all, you know?
In the United States, most often, those who succeed allow the managing of the campaign and the managing of the candidate to somebody else. They're the candidates. If you're going to be a candidate and a campaign manager, I guarantee you, most often you're going to fail.
How important is the campaign manager in a campaign?
Very.
Do the candidate has to obey in a way or to...
Oh, you don't obey. I mean, you're the candidate, you're in charge. But when I lost John Sasso, it was a big blow.
In 1988, for example, in my considered opinion, if Mike Dukakis had not changed campaign manager, he would have been president of the United States. He had to change his campaign manager in the middle of the road, and that cost him the election. Campaign manager is an extremely important part. He's the general of the election.
The economy's stupid. I think if you did a nexus, it would come up in about 1,000 places. And don't forget health care. You know, I was kidding James yesterday. I said he's about to pass from the role of regular human being into the role of a legend. And I think he really deserves it. Because probably for the first time in a generation tomorrow, we're going to win. And that means that more people are going to have better jobs. People are going to pay a little less for health care, get better care. And more kids are going to go to better schools. So thanks.
We won Nevada big. Governor, we're going to, I mean, it's looking like close to 400. It's a landslide. Ohio's not called yet. North Carolina's not called yet. But everything else, I mean, Michigan, dead even in Florida, and, you know, it's just unbelievable. You ought to be the happiest man in the world. But the one thing you got to be, I mean, we really want you to say whatever you want to say tonight, but you just got to be careful about being too programmatic. I mean, you should definitely be New Democrat, and we love Hillary's new patriotism thing, which he tried to put in there. Also, you got to do at the end, he goes back to the announcement speech, which is very important. But you know, just speak from your heart tonight. I mean, that's all that matters. Say what you want to say. I mean, this is your night. Okay, we'll see you in a little bit. Bye-bye.
And finally, I want to thank the members of my brilliant, aggressive, unconventional, but always winning campaign staff.
That's the right way.
Bill Clinton is out of step and out of touch, and come this November, he's going to be tossed out of office by the Honorable Bob Dole of Kansas.
How is going to respond to the attacks?
We are not going to be talking about character insults and character attacks. We're not going to be talking about Senator Dole personally, nor his wife or any of his family or any of the other family members involved with Jack Kemp. I think that's the difference that I was talking about. We are going to talk about our record, and we're going to talk about the contrast with Senator Dole and his record.
After these 4 good, hard years, I still believe in a place called hope.
If President Clinton...
We will respond with talking about whatever the issues are, but we will talk about issues. We're not going to talk about insults. We're not going to talk about character.
Then you've got an ethical problem. It's public ethics. We're not talking about private. We're talking about public ethics. And you have 900 files there.
And I don't want to respond in kind to all these things. I could answer a lot of these things tit for tat, but I hope we can talk about what we're going to do in the future.
Senator Dole has said that he would like to be a bridge to the past. President Clinton is a bridge to the future.
But with all respect, we do not need to build a bridge to the past. We need to build a bridge to the future, and that is what I commit to you to do.
Στη χώρα που γέννησε την τηλεόραση, ένα μεγάλο μέρος της εκστρατείας πραγματοποιείται μέσω της μικρής οθόνης. Ειδήσεις, θετικές και αρνητικές διαφημίσεις και φυσικά τα περίφημα debates, οι τηλεοπτικές μονομαχίες μεταξύ των υποψηφίων.
Well, the debates they do have something to say about the outcome of the election. Again, let's go back in history. I think without doubt, Kennedy would not have been president without the debates.
You yourself said to Khrushchev, you may be ahead of us in rocket thrust, but we're ahead of you in color television. In your famous discussion in the kitchen, I think that color television is not as important as rocket thrust. Secondly, I didn't say we had the worst slums in the world. I said we had too many slums, and that they are bad, and we ought to do something about them. And we ought to support housing legislation, which this administration has opposed. I didn't say we had the worst education in the world. What I said was that 10 years ago, we were producing twice as many scientists and engineers as the Soviet Union, and today they're producing twice as many as we are.
And the interesting thing about the Kennedy-Nixon debates, polls afterward indicated that if you were watching on television, you thought Kennedy won. If you were listening on the radio, you thought Nixon won. President Kennedy, who succeeded President Eisenhower, had the first televised press conference that was unedited. Jack Kennedy loved the news media. He loved reporters, and television was made for him. And I think that Kennedy was the first telegenic president. I think that he captured the eye of the camera. And since Kennedy, television has become the far more dominant and pervasive medium in covering politics.
Η εκλογή του Ρέιγκαν το 1980 στη θέση του Προέδρου σηματοδοτεί μια νέα στροφή στη σχέση της τηλεόρασης με την πολιτική.
I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
I covered the convention in 1980, the Republican convention, and I was on the floor while Reagan was speaking, and he had the crowd absolutely mesmerized. He had them in the palm of his hand.
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
When Ronald Reagan looked in the camera and ask the American people, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? The American people thought, you know, we did not have the Iranians holding hostage for 444 days Americans. We were not this, we were not that, we were not that. So the answer was, no, we're not better off today, because they felt uneasy. And so that was a key element to throw Jimmy Carter off balance.
It does not help if you're a Bush or a Perot with the ears out going against a Bill Clinton who's relatively young and handsome and articulate. It does not help if you're Jimmy Carter. As good as he was, as decent as he was, you're going against Ronald Reagan, who is the great communicator.
I think in these debates, President Clinton, because he is so photogenic, so articulate, so knowledgeable, and so intelligent, has always had an enormous impact in these debates. I don't know if you saw any of the debates in 92, but he's fabulous on television.
Μία από τις παγίδες που πρέπει να αποφύγουν οι υποψήφοι στις μονομαχίες είναι οι πολιτικές γκάφες, όπως αυτή του Προέδρου Φόρντ, ο οποίος ξέχασε ότι η Σοβιετική Αυτοκρατορία του κακού κατήχε την Ανατολική Ευρώπη.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Μία άλλη ιστορική γκάφα ήταν αυτή του Τζίμι Κάρτερ, όταν δήλωσε ότι για την μείωση των πυρηνικών όπλων συμβουλεύονταν την 12χρονη κόρη του.
I had a discussion with my daughter Amy the other day before I came here to ask her what the most important issue was. She said she thought nuclear weaponry.
Μερικές φορές γκάφες μπορούν να γίνουν και εκτός των τηλεοπτικών μονομαχιών.
But we're very honored to be back in San Francisco. We're here for a great convention. We had a great convention. San Diego. Or San Diego, sure, yeah.
Because of television, certain moments are more important than others. I mean, poor President Ford, who stumbled occasionally coming down the stairs, it suddenly became a metaphor for him and his administration. Bush looking at his watch in the Richmond debate against Clinton. I mean, I've looked at my watch dozens of times in the course of a debate. Now, usually I take it off and I put it in front of me. So he looked at his watch, so what? We must have seen that replayed 250 times, as if he was bored, he didn't care. He's just looking at his watch, trying to figure out how much time he had left. You know, these are the kinds of things that, and some of it's silly, but at a time when so many people get most of their information from television, you got to be sensitive to that.
30 seconds, thank you. On behalf of the Commission on Presidential Debates, I am pleased to welcome you to the second presidential debate. I am Bernard Shaw of CNN. Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee, and Governor Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee. For the next 90 minutes, we will be questioning the candidates.
The question that was asked of Michael Dukakis, what would you do if your wife was raped and killed? Of course, referring to the capital punishment issue. But Michael gave the long, logical answer that required really a short, dynamic, decisive response, and that threw him off balance.
And Bernard Shaw was on that debate panel, the journalist. He's a distinguished reporter in this country, one of the great African-American journalists in this country. And Bernard Shaw hit Dukakis with the ultimate question.
The first question goes to Governor Dukakis. You have 2 minutes to respond. Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
Dukakis simply was not prepared for that question because it didn't occur to anybody that anybody would frame it in that way. I'm sure they had said, you may get a question on capital punishment, and he would say, I can handle that. What I'm said is a sincere belief. People either have to accept it or reject it. But when you put it in the context, let's say your wife had been raped, he was totally unprepared for it.
Frankly, if anything, I think I might have been over-prepared for the second debate. I was in 39 debates with my Democratic opponents in the primary.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during
all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America. But we have work to do in this nation.
It seems to me, Bernie, gets to a question of values. And here I do have, on this particular question, a big difference with my opponent.
And he was absolutely tongue-tied. He could not respond in an intelligent, forceful, effective way. It left the appearance of indecisiveness and weakness, and I think tilted the election against him.
Some people are saying that this was the crucial moment of the whole confrontation.
I had been asked that question 1,000 times. I'd responded to it pretty much, maybe too much in a matter-of-fact way, and wasn't as emotional as I should have been. And that was my fault, perhaps, but, you know, there's never a crucial moment.
However, there are no restrictions on the questions that my colleagues and I can ask this evening, and the candidates have no prior knowledge of our questions.
I found out later that some of the other journalists on the panel said to Shaw, they knew he was going to ask the question. They said to him, Bernie, don't you think that question, as it's framed, is much too tough? And he said, no, I think it has to be asked.
So the questions kept getting more and more outrageous, and it became more of an ego thing for the press than it did as for the press to take a role where they were simply asking questions. Now, some people might disagree with me about that, but that's my impression, and I think it's the public's impression.
So you think that the question was rather unfair?
Yes, I do.
Even though Bernie's question triggered it, it was a candidate's failure to respond very well that made it such an issue. Had he had a brilliant response that commanded the hearts and the minds of the voters, the question would have been seen as a softball, as an easy lob up to him, and he knocked it out. But as it turned out, he didn't do well.
In 1992, the role of the press was severely diminished because there was such a public reaction to the increasing tendency of the questioners of the candidates by the media to showcase themselves rather than the candidate.
Most of the candidates, they're announcing that they're going to run for nomination or for president through CNN.
Well, it's a free country, you know. Like Greece, the candidates can do what they want to do. And if an individual is going to make legitimate news, not just some crackpot, some oddball, but make legitimate news, you bet we'll cover it, and I'm delighted to have them announce on CNN.
Television has transformed journalism, and the people who are least rewarded are the ones who spend the time doing the investigations. The people who are most rewarded are the face men and face women, the anchor people who look good on television, but of course do very little of the nitty-gritty work of journalism.
Do you have the feeling that your power is increasing vis-a-vis the parties and the politicians and the candidates?
That's a good question as to the amount of power or influence we have. I don't believe it's as great as others think. You know, you'd like to consider yourself to be a big, strong, influential guy. But the truth of the matter is, there are so many other news organizations and news outlets and factors that weigh on a campaign and in the mind of the voters that no one organization, CNN or NBC or Greek television, none of us can dictate to a free people what they're going to think, how they're going to think, and how they're going to vote.
You want to do another two?
I'm a Dole supporter, but I thought he would not do well in the debate, but I think he's doing very well.
I think most of America will use this to
to make their decision. I think that Americans in general, relative to Europeans, probably don't follow the particulars of the election as much, and I think that these debates really make a big difference in the decision.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
What's the role of the money in all that, in the campaign?
Well, it's very different in the United States than it is in other democracies, especially parliamentary democracies, when campaigns are so much shorter. Money is raised in the United States in enormous amounts, principally to pay for television.
Θεωρητικά, ο νόμος ελέγχει αυστηρά τα έσοδα των υποψηφίων και βάζει όρια στο ποσό της χρηματοδότησής τους από εταιρείες και ιδιώτες. Αλλά στην πράξη υπάρχουν πολλά παράθυρα.
There is a limit. As an individual, you can only give $1,000. But your wife can give $1,000 and your children can give $1,000. And if you give to the political parties rather than to the candidates, there is no limit. For example, the president had a birthday celebration in New York last week, and they raised $10 million. Now that wasn't at $1,000 a person.
The interest groups, for example, a lot of the money is going to be spent by the tobacco industry against Bill Clinton, who is opposed to smoking for children, for example. They're going to spend a lot of money. They're going to contribute a lot of money.
Money is a very big problem. We have to do something about it.
Look, people don't give for their good health. Most of these people really don't believe in a whole lot other than their own economic futures and their bank accounts. In fact, this year, I've attended both of the National Party conventions, in San Diego for the Republicans, in Chicago for the Democrats. I saw exactly the same lobbyists, exactly the same interest groups, exactly the same wealthy individuals at both conventions.
But have you some proof that companies or individuals have been recompensated because of giving money to a campaign?
No, I don't think that happens very often. No, what they get back are tax breaks that are worth millions. So they can invest $100,000 in a political contribution and they can get several $1 million back in a tax break. That's a good investment.
Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Another thing which is different here than in Europe is the role of the wives of the candidates during the campaigns.
The wife of a candidate is very important in America. Bill Clinton, last time when he ran, talked about Hillary. He said, "You get two for the price of one." That was a campaign slogan. Well, I watched the Republicans in San Diego, and Elizabeth Dole, you remember, walked down on the floor and wandered out among the delegates. That Dole is saying the same thing, two for the price of one.
Actually, if you think about it, this was happening all over the world, is that women are taking leadership roles. And we're seeing this change in politics as well, where you have in both our president and vice president, as well as Senator Dole's wife, women that are incredibly accomplished, that have had careers, that are out there in very much of leadership positions. And so they're out there not only supporting their husbands, but talking about the issues that matter to families and women and children.
Did you participate in the preparation of Mrs. Clinton?
I did not this time did not participate, no, but I thought her speech was fantastic.
And we have learned that to raise a happy, healthy, and hopeful child, it takes a family. It takes teachers. Yes, it takes a village. And it takes a president.
What do I think about the women? In all of American history, the First Lady has not determined any presidential election. In fact, very seldom do the candidates' wives even influence 1% of the vote. If there's ever an exception, it will be this year. It will be Hillary Clinton, because she is so controversial.
I think Hillary Clinton sort of changed the role of First Lady forever. And I think most of us knew that that was going to happen before the election in 1992. Women are more highly educated. They come out of professions, as both Mrs. Dole and Mrs. Clinton do. They're both lawyers. They have both had distinguished careers.
So is this a race also between Mrs. Dole and Mrs. Clinton?
I think a lot of times the press would like to make it that way, but we don't feel that way at all. It really, when it comes down to it, when people go into that voting booth, it's really a race between Bob Dole and Bill Clinton.
It's scary to think that, isn't it? That he actually is the most powerful, that Bill Clinton is the most powerful man in the world. Oh, no, but it isn't true. Hillary Clinton is the most powerful man in the world. Oh, it's terrible. I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, okay. Just kidding.
I don't know how it will work when we have our first woman president. I don't know how good a first man will be in helping his wife. Probably no one will want to listen to him. Probably unfair to men, but that's coming. I don't know when, but it's coming.
So, Namu, are you happy that the Republicans are coming to your hometown?
In Chicago, I said Chicago, in Chicago, my hometown, here we go to Chicago, Chicago, that's right back to my hometown, to Chicago.
The conventions have now become sort of gigantic television shows, commercials. In the era before television was so important, we had, since very often, contentious debates on issues.
There is a certain amount of show business at play here. Our view at CNN has always been, you have your convention wherever you wish to have it, whatever time and place. It's our job to come there and cover it. From a personal standpoint, watching thousands of people shouting and hollering and cheering in the aisles on the floor of a convention with balloons going up and waving the signs is a lot more interesting than some of the manicured and controlled events that we see today.
With God's help, we must answer the call. Thank you, and God bless you all.
The differences in the two parties have, in some ways, declined in the last 8 years, I think. When Bill Clinton came on the scene, he sought to stake out the center for the Democratic Party and succeeded quite well in doing that. And that has meant that the ideological differences that traditionally have separated the party have sort of come toward the center.
Well, that's nonsense. I mean, just look at what has happened in the last year. Clinton forced a Republican Congress to pass a minimum wage increase they didn't want to pass. He forced them to pass the health care bill they didn't want to pass. He stopped them from decimating Medicare and Medicaid. The new welfare bill is far better than the one they originally proposed. There's $4 billion there for child care for the mothers of welfare recipients so that they can get the training and go to work. That was all the president's doing. There's an enormous difference between the parties.
Keep that faith! Stand tall! Never surrender your hopes and your joys! Keep that faith! We will win and deserve to win! Stand tall, Mr. Clinton! We will win and deserve to win! Keep hope alive!
Americans will choose in November between men with very different views concerning the uses of American power. Unfortunately, Bill Clinton and his administration do not understand how to protect and preserve American strength and credibility. For this reason, they make threats they do not carry out. They accept promises on which they never collect.
There was some analysis saying that the women's vote will decide for the outcome of the elections.
Well, absolutely,
is that right?
Absolutely. Since 1964, more women have gone to the polls in every election than men. And women, more than men, traditionally vote Democratic. So we need the women's vote, not only to re-elect the president, but to make sure that the 105th Congress goes back to being a Democratic House.
There are real issues in this campaign. The discussions and the differences between Clinton and Dole on issues like the economy, on looking at issues of growth and taxes and how we handle the future, what this country does to compete in the global economy, which is the principal question.
Which will be the issues that will more influence the public opinion?
We will be talking about the accomplishments of this administration, but we don't think that's enough. The economy is in very good shape. We've created 10 million new jobs. Housing starts are up. Things are going quite well, but we don't feel that that's enough. We haven't touched every life. We haven't made every life more secure. We haven't protected every family that we need to. And so what he's going to do is lay out a vision for the future and where he wants to take us in the next 4 years. And I think the combination of that will be very compelling to the American people.
Senator Dole, the President said in his opening statement that we are better off today than we were 4 years ago. Do you agree?
Well, he's better off than he was 4 years ago.
I agree with that. That's right.
Yeah.
President Clinton is going to put the highest level attention on the conflict in the Aegean and the division of Cyprus. We've seen by events over the last couple of years that the tensions are not going to go away, that we need a good and fair and just solution, and I think the President is committed to that. My sense is that you will see a very high-level initiative of some sort relatively early in the term, and the President's going to push hard for a solution.
Στο μεταξύ, στην Άγκυρα, ο Ρόουφ Ντεχτάς συναντήθηκε με τον πρόεδρο της Τουρκίας, Σουλεϊμάν Ντεμιρέλ, και την Υπουργό Εξωτερικών, Τανσού Τσιλέρ.
Στον απόϊχο των εξαγγελιών του Υπουργού Παιδείας για την τριτοβάθμια εκπαίδευση, οι καθηγητές ξεκίνησαν από σήμερα των Πολιτειών. Οι εκδηλώσεις για την επίσημη ενθρόνηση του πλανητάρχη θα διαρκέσουν για πολλές ακόμη ώρες.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America, William Jefferson Clinton.
Τις 32 λέξεις του προεδρικού όρκου επανέλαβε για δεύτερη φορά μέσα σε 4 χρόνια ο Μπιλ Κλίντον, πλαισιωμένος από χιλιάδες οπαδούς του που αψηφώντας το κρύο συγκεντρώθηκαν στο λόφο του Καπιτολίου. Πέρα από τα καθιερωμένα, ο πρόεδρος είχε πολλά ακόμα να πει. Είναι ο τελευταίος Αμερικανός πρόεδρος του αιώνα μας και το σύνθημα για νέους ορίζοντες δεν μπορούσε να λείπει. Γι' αυτό και ο Μπιλ Κλίντον δανείστηκε τα λόγια του Τζον Κέννεντι.
My fellow citizens, at this last presidential inauguration of the 20th century, let us lift our eyes toward the challenges that await us in the next century. Let us set our sights upon a land of new promise.
Πονοκέφαλοι τύπου Whitewater αλλά και κάποιων ροζ σκανδάλων δεν έχουν θέση στη μεγάλη ημέρα του Προέδρου. Αναγκαίο όμως έκρινε ο Μπιλ Κλίντον να εγκαινιάσει τη νέα θητεία του με λόγια που πρέπει, όπως είπε, να γίνουν πράξη. Στο πνεύμα της κοινωνικής αρμονίας και της πολιτικής συμφιλίωσης.